Captain Marcus Chen had seen many strange things during his 20 years exploring the galaxy, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The massive alien warship hung in space before the human diplomatic vessel, like a mountain of twisted metal and crystalline structures. Its surface pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed almost alive, creating a hypnotic dance of blue and purple light against the star-filled void. "Sir, they're requesting permission to board," reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the communications station. Her voice carried a slight tremor that she tried to hide. This was humanity's first contact with the Zephyrian Empire, a civilization that controlled nearly half the known galaxy. Every intelligence report painted them as ruthlessly efficient conquerors who had never been known to negotiate with lesser species. Marcus straightened his uniform and checked his sidearm one final time. The weight of representing all of humanity pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. Earth's colonies were spread thin across a dozen systems, and their technology was laughably primitive compared to the Zephyrians. One wrong word here could mean the extinction of his entire species. "Grant them permission," Marcus commanded, his voice steady despite the churning in his stomach. "And Sarah, record everything. If this goes badly, at least our people will know what happened." The airlock cycled with a soft hiss, and Marcus felt his heart rate spike as he waited. Through the reinforced viewport, he watched as figures in ornate armor began to board his ship. They moved with fluid grace despite their imposing size, each warrior standing nearly 8 feet tall. Their armor seemed to be made from the same living metal as their ship, constantly shifting and adapting to their movements. But it was the figure at the center of the group that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. Even through the environmental suit, he could see she was different from the others. Where the warriors wore practical armor, hers was a work of art. Flowing robes of what looked like liquid starlight cascaded around her form, and a crown of crystalline spires rose from her elongated skull. This had to be Queen Vexara herself, the legendary ruler who had united 1,000 worlds under her banner. The inner airlock door opened with a pneumatic sigh, and Marcus stepped forward to greet the delegation. The moment Queen Vexara's eyes locked onto his through her helmet's visor, something extraordinary happened. Her entire body went rigid, and a sound that could only be described as a sharp intake of breath echoed through her suit's external speakers. Without warning, the Queen dropped to one knee, her head bowed low in what appeared to be a gesture of deep respect or submission. The effect on her entourage was immediate and dramatic. Every warrior, advisor, and technician in her party followed suit, creating a sea of kneeling figures in the cramped corridor of the human ship. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. In all the briefings and simulations, no one had prepared him for this scenario. The queen of the most powerful empire in known space was kneeling before him, a simple human captain from a backwater species that had barely achieved interstellar flight. "Your Majesty," Marcus managed to stammer, uncertain of proper protocol. "Please, there's no need for such formality. I'm just—" Queen Vexara raised her head slightly, and when she spoke, her voice carried through the ship's communication system with an otherworldly resonance that seemed to vibrate in Marcus's bones. But what shocked him even more than the sound was the fact that she was speaking perfect English, with barely a trace of accent. "Forgive me, honored one," she said, her voice filled with what sounded like genuine reverence. "I did not expect to encounter one of your kind here in this remote sector. We have searched for so long, waited for so many cycles hoping for this moment." Marcus felt the deck plates vibrate under his feet as more Zephyrian ships moved into position around the human vessel. But rather than feeling threatened, he sensed something else in their movements. Protection, perhaps, or escort formation. The Queen's warriors remained kneeling, their weapons powered down and stowed. "I'm afraid I don't understand," Marcus replied, fighting to keep his voice level. "My kind, we're just humans. We've only recently developed faster-than-light travel. This is actually our first contact with your empire." A sound that might have been laughter, though tinged with sadness, came through Queen Vexara's speakers. She slowly rose to her feet, but kept her head slightly bowed in a gesture of continued respect. Her entourage followed her lead, creating an unusual tableau of the galaxy's most feared warriors, showing deference to a handful of confused humans. "Just humans," she repeated, and there was wonder in her voice. "After 10,000 years, the Makers have returned to us, and they call themselves just humans." She turned to one of her advisors, speaking in rapid Zephyrian before switching back to English. "Tell me, Captain, what do you know of your species' history? Do your records speak of the time before you achieved spaceflight?" Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in the Queen's tone, a mixture of hope and desperate need, that suggested this conversation was about to take a turn he wasn't prepared for. "Our recorded history goes back several thousand years," he answered carefully. "Though there are gaps, particularly in our earliest civilizations." The Queen nodded as if this confirmed something she already knew. "And in those gaps, those missing pieces of your history, have your archaeologists ever found artifacts they couldn't explain? Structures built with technology beyond your understanding? Genetic markers that suggest your evolution was guided?" The questions hit Marcus like physical blows. How could she know about the anomalous ruins found on Earth, the unexplained technological jumps in human development, the mysterious genetic sequences that seemed almost artificially inserted into the human genome? "I think," Marcus said slowly, his mind racing with implications he wasn't ready to accept, "that we need to have a much longer conversation." Queen Vexara's helmet retracted with a soft whisper of alien technology, revealing a face that was both beautiful and terrifying. Her skin had a pale blue tint that seemed to glow with inner light, and her eyes were large and luminous, filled with intelligence that spoke of millennia of experience. But when she looked at Marcus, those ancient eyes held something he never expected to see from a galactic conqueror. Hope. "Indeed we do. Marcus Chen of the human race," she said, and he realized with a start that she somehow knew his name without any introduction. "For you and your people are not the primitive species you believe yourselves to be. You are the children of the makers, the architects of our civilization, and you have finally come home." The silence that followed Queen Vexara's revelation stretched like a taut wire through the ship's corridor. Marcus felt the weight of her words settling over him like a heavy blanket, each syllable reshaping everything he thought he knew about humanity's place in the universe. Behind him, he could hear his crew members shifting nervously, their breathing shallow and quick. "I'm sorry," Marcus said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did you just say that humans are the makers? The architects of your civilization?" He let out a laugh that sounded forced even to his own ears. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, that's impossible. We've only had spaceflight for about 50 years. Your empire spans thousands of star systems." Queen Vexara's expression remained patient, almost maternal, as if she were explaining something obvious to a confused child. She gestured to one of her advisors, a tall, thin alien with 6 arms and skin that rippled like liquid mercury. The advisor stepped forward and activated a small device that projected a 3-dimensional hologram into the air between them. The image showed a star map, but not like any Marcus had ever seen. This one pulsed with different colors, showing the expansion of various civilizations over time. He watched as red zones spread across sectors, representing the Zephyrian Empire's conquest, while other colors showed different alien species rising and falling across millennia. 10,000 years ago, Queen Vexara began, her voice taking on the cadence of someone reciting ancient history. The galaxy was a very different place. Primitive species fought endless wars over resources and territory. Disease, famine, and chaos ruled most worlds. Then they came. The hologram shifted and new points of light appeared across the map, colored in brilliant gold. These points didn't expand like conquering armies. Instead, they seemed to nurture and guide, helping other civilizations develop and prosper. "The makers," the Queen continued, "appeared almost simultaneously on dozens of worlds. They shared knowledge, technology, and wisdom. They taught us medicine that could cure any disease, engineering that could reshape entire planets, and most importantly, they taught us how to work together instead of destroying each other." Marcus stared at the hologram, his scientific mind wrestling with the implications. "Even if that were true," he said slowly, "what makes you think these makers were human? Couldn't they have been any advanced species?" The advisor manipulated the display, and suddenly the corridor was filled with images that made Marcus's heart stop. Ancient sculptures carved into stone and metal across a dozen different worlds. Paintings on cave walls, hieroglyphs etched into crystal formations. All of them showed the same thing: bipedal figures with the exact proportions and features of human beings, teaching and working alongside various alien species. "These artifacts exist on every world the makers visited," Queen Vexara explained. "The beings depicted always have the same number of fingers, The same facial structure, the same body proportions. When we first detected your ship's approach and scanned your crew, our computers immediately flagged the match. You are identical to the Makers in every measurable way. Lieutenant Kim stepped forward from behind Marcus, her face pale but determined. "Sir, if I may," she said, then addressed the Queen directly. "Your Majesty, even if our ancestors were involved in galactic civilization, why did they leave? What happened to them?" The Queen's luminous eyes darkened with what looked like pain.
That is the great mystery that has haunted us for 10 millennia.
One day they simply vanished. No warning, no explanation. Every Maker installation went silent simultaneously. Their ships, their bases, their research facilities, all abandoned in perfect order, as if they had simply walked away from everything. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was heavy with emotion. "We searched everywhere. We sent expeditions to every corner of the galaxy, looking for any trace of where they might have gone. Some of our species believed they had ascended to a higher plane of existence. Others thought they had been destroyed by some cosmic catastrophe. A few suggested they might have returned to their home world to await the proper time for their return." The hologram changed again, showing a small blue-green planet in a remote spiral arm of the galaxy. Marcus felt his breath catch as he recognized the continents and oceans of Earth. "This world," Queen Vexara said softly, "showed traces of advanced civilization that ended approximately 10,000 years ago. Massive energy signatures, then nothing. Most of our scholars dismissed it as another dead end. The planet was too remote, too primitive. Surely the Makers wouldn't have chosen such an insignificant world as their home." Marcus felt pieces of a cosmic puzzle clicking into place in his mind. The unexplained gaps in human history, the mysterious technological leaps that archaeologists had never been able to explain, the ancient monuments on Earth that seemed to defy the capabilities of early human civilization. "But you believed differently," he said, understanding beginning to dawn. "I believed in hope," the Queen replied, "and in the promise the Makers made before they disappeared. They told us that one day, when the galaxy was ready, when their children had learned to stand on their own, they would return. They said to watch for the signs. A species that had rediscovered the gift of reaching for the stars, who carried the same compassion and drive to help others that had defined the Makers themselves." Marcus thought about humanity's recent expansion into space, their first contact protocols that emphasized peaceful interaction and mutual benefit, their medical missions to colonies suffering from disease, their efforts to establish trade networks based on cooperation rather than exploitation. "The signs you mentioned," he said carefully. "How do you know we match them?" Queen Vexara smiled, and for the first time since her arrival, she looked truly happy. "Because in the 50 years since your species achieved spaceflight, you have never once used your technology to conquer another world. Every colony you've established has been built through cooperation and mutual agreement. Every species you've encountered, you've attempted to help rather than dominate. You carry the same spark of curiosity and compassion that made the Makers legends across the galaxy." The advisor beside her activated another display, showing recent human activities throughout their small corner of space. Medical relief missions, scientific research stations shared with alien species, diplomatic efforts that had prevented 3 separate wars between non-human civilizations. "We have been watching your species carefully since you achieved interstellar flight," the Queen continued. "Every action you've taken has confirmed what I suspected. You are their children, carrying their legacy in your genes and in your hearts." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was hearing. If it was true, it meant humanity wasn't the young, insignificant species they had always believed themselves to be. They were the descendants of beings who had shaped galactic civilization itself. "Your Majesty," he said finally, "assuming everything you've told us is true, what does this mean for our people, for the relationship between humans and the Zephyrian Empire?" Queen Vexara stepped closer, and Marcus could see tears forming in her luminous eyes. "It means," she said softly, "that after 10,000 years of waiting, the children have finally come home. It means that everything we have built, everything we have preserved, belongs to you by right of inheritance. The Zephyrian Empire exists to serve the Makers and their descendants." She gestured to her warriors, who immediately began removing their weapons and placing them on the deck as a gesture of complete trust and submission. "It means," she continued, "that we need your help to face the greatest threat our galaxy has ever known. Marcus felt the temperature in the corridor seem to drop several degrees as Queen Vexara's words hung in the air. The reverent atmosphere that had surrounded their meeting suddenly shifted to something much darker and more urgent. Her warriors, who had been showing gestures of submission and respect, now stood at rigid attention, their body language speaking of barely contained fear. "A threat?" Marcus asked, his captain's instincts immediately switching from diplomat to protector. What kind of threat requires the help of a species that doesn't even have the technology to match a single one of your warships? The Queen exchanged glances with her advisors, and Marcus caught what looked like an argument conducted entirely through subtle facial expressions and minute gestures. Finally, she seemed to reach some internal decision and nodded grimly. "Show him the recordings from the outer rim," she commanded her mercury-skinned advisor. The holographic display shifted dramatically, showing what appeared to be a massive space battle. But as Marcus watched, he realized this wasn't a battle between two fleets. This was something else entirely, a desperate evacuation. Zephyrian ships, some of them larger than entire human cities, were fleeing from something that remained just outside the display's field of view. 3 months ago, Queen Vexara began, her voice tight with controlled emotion, our most distant colonies in the Andromeda Spiral went silent. We sent battle fleets to investigate, assuming we were dealing with a rebellion or perhaps a hostile species from beyond our borders. The display zoomed in on one of the fleeing ships, its hull scarred and melted in patterns that looked almost organic. Through the gaps in its armor, Marcus could see internal structures that pulsed with sickly yellow light, as if something alien had taken root inside the vessel itself. "What we found," the Queen continued, "was worse than any enemy we could have imagined. An intelligence that consumes technology, perverts it, turns it against its creators. They call themselves the Devourers, and they have been spreading through the outer galaxy like a plague." Marcus leaned forward, studying the images more carefully. "They infect your technology? How is that possible?" "We don't fully understand the mechanism," admitted the six-armed advisor, speaking for the first time in heavily accented but clear English. "They appear to be part biological entity, part living computer virus. When they encounter advanced technology, they don't destroy it. They remake it, corrupt it, turn it into extensions of their collective will." The display showed more horrifying images. Zephyrian cities where the buildings themselves had become twisted parodies of their original forms. Streets that writhed like living things, and worst of all, the people. Former Zephyrians stumbled through the corrupted streets, their bodies partially merged with the infected technology around them, their eyes glowing with the same sickly yellow light. "They don't just consume worlds," Queen Vexara explained. "They consume civilizations. Everything we are, everything we've built, everything we've learned, it all becomes part of them. And the more advanced the technology they absorb, the stronger and smarter they become." Lieutenant Kim, who had been watching the display with growing horror, suddenly spoke up. "Your Majesty, if these Devourers can corrupt any technology they encounter, how do you fight something like that? Wouldn't your weapons just make them stronger?" The Queen's expression grew even more grave. "Exactly. Every ship we send against them, every weapon we deploy potentially adds to their strength. We've been forced into a fighting retreat, abandoning entire sectors of space rather than risk giving them more resources to corrupt." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as the implications became clear. "And you think humans can help because our technology is too primitive to be useful to them?" "Not primitive," Queen Vexara corrected quickly. "Different. Your technology developed along completely different principles from ours, where we focused on integration and harmonic resonance. You built everything on isolated systems and redundancy. Your computers don't network the way ours do. Your weapons systems are completely separate from your navigation and life support." The advisor manipulated the display to show schematic comparisons between human and Zephyrian technology. Marcus could see what they meant, where alien ships had elegant, interconnected systems that flowed together like a single organism. Human technology looked crude and chunky by comparison, with each system carefully separated from the others. "More importantly," the Queen continued, "the makers left something behind when they departed. Hidden protocols buried deep in the quantum structure of reality itself, safeguards that only activate in the presence of their genetic descendants, your species." "Safeguards against what?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Against the Devourers," Queen Vexara replied. Our xenoarchaeologists have found references to them in the oldest Maker texts. Apparently, this isn't the first time they've threatened the galaxy. The Makers faced them once before, 10,000 years ago, and won. But the victory came at a terrible price. The display shifted again, showing ancient texts covered in symbols that looked almost familiar to Marcus, though he couldn't quite read them. As he stared at the writing, however, he began to notice patterns, structures that reminded him of human mathematical concepts and linguistic principles. What price? He asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. They had to withdraw from galactic civilization entirely, the Queen explained. The safeguards they created could only be maintained by removing themselves from all contact with advanced technology. They returned to their homeworld and allowed their civilization to regress, hiding among primitive cultures until the time came when they would be needed again. Marcus felt the weight of cosmic history settling on his shoulders, like a crushing burden. You're saying that humans, that we, deliberately forgot our own advanced civilization to create some kind of failsafe against these devourers? We believe so, the Queen replied. And now that they've returned, only you can activate the defenses the Makers built into the very fabric of space-time. But time is running short. Our latest intelligence suggests the Devourers have corrupted approximately 30% of the Outer Rim territories. At their current rate of expansion, they'll reach the core worlds within 6 standard months. Lieutenant Kim stepped forward, her face pale but determined. What exactly would we need to do? How do we activate these safeguards? Queen Vexara turned to her advisor, who produced a small crystalline device that pulsed with soft blue light. This is a Maker artifact, one of the few that survived their departure. Our scientists believe it's some kind of key or activation device, but it only responds to direct contact with Maker genetics. Every time we've tried to use it, nothing happens. Marcus stared at the device, feeling both fascinated and terrified by its implications. It looked almost organic, like a piece of living crystal that had been shaped by intelligence rather than cut by tools. As he watched, the blue light seemed to pulse in rhythm with his own heartbeat. There's something else, the Queen said softly. The activation process, according to our translations of the Maker texts, requires not just genetic compatibility, but also knowledge that was supposed to be passed down through the generations. Knowledge that may have been lost when your people regressed to primitive culture. What kind of knowledge? Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer would be something he wasn't prepared for. Queen Vexara met his eyes directly, and he could see both hope and desperation warring in her ancient gaze. The true names of creation, she said. The fundamental frequencies that hold reality together. The quantum passwords that will unlock the greatest weapon ever conceived. The power to rewrite the laws of physics themselves. Marcus realized that humanity's greatest test wasn't going to be about advanced technology or superior firepower. It was going to be about remembering who they had once been and finding the courage to become that again when the entire galaxy depended on it. 3 days later, Marcus found himself standing in the vast archives beneath the Zephyrian capital world, surrounded by crystalline data storage systems that stretched up into shadows, beyond the reach of artificial lighting. The weight of 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge pressed down around him, and he felt small and insignificant in comparison. Queen Vexara walked beside him, her flowing robes creating soft whispers of sound as they moved between towering data monoliths. Every piece of information we've gathered about the Makers is stored here, she explained, gesturing to the impossible expanse of crystal formations. Archaeological findings, linguistic analysis, technological fragments, even philosophical texts that survived their departure. But until now, we've been trying to understand them from the outside, as worshippers studying distant gods. Marcus ran his fingers along one of the smooth crystal surfaces, feeling a strange tingling sensation, as if the stored information was trying to communicate directly with his nervous system. And you think having actual human DNA will make a difference in how we interpret the data? I know it will, the Queen replied with certainty. Watch this. She led him to a central platform where the Maker artifact they had shown him on the ship now rested in a complex array of scanning equipment. The crystalline device, which had pulsed with soft blue light during their first meeting, now blazed like a small star, its illumination casting dancing shadows throughout the archives. It began reacting the moment you set foot on this world, Queen Vexara explained. Our scientists are detecting quantum resonance patterns they've never seen before. The artifact is trying to communicate with something, and we believe that something is you. Marcus approached the platform cautiously, feeling the hair on his arm stand up as he got closer to the artifact. The device seemed to be singing at a frequency just below the threshold of hearing, and he had the strangest sensation that if he could just listen a little more carefully, he would understand what it was trying to tell him. "Captain," came Lieutenant Kim's voice from behind him. She had insisted on accompanying him to the archives, despite the Queen's suggestion that fewer people would be less overwhelming for the ancient technology. "Sir, I'm reading some very unusual energy signatures coming from that thing. Whatever it's doing, it's affecting local spacetime in ways that don't match any known physics." Dr. Elena Vasquez, the expedition's xenoarchaeologist, looked up from where she had been examining a collection of maker writing samples. "Marcus, you need to see this. These texts, they're changing." Marcus turned from the artifact to look at the crystal tablets Dr. Vasquez was studying. The symbols carved into their surfaces were definitely different from what he had seen in the recordings on his ship. Where before they had been static and mysterious, now they seemed to pulse and shift, rearranging themselves into new patterns as he watched. "It's like they're trying to adapt themselves to be readable by modern humans," Dr. Vasquez continued, her voice filled with excitement and awe. "The grammar structures are shifting towards something that resembles early Indo-European languages, but with mathematical concepts integrated directly into the syntax." Queen Vexara moved to stand beside them, her expression filled with wonder. "In 10,000 years of study, we have never seen the maker texts change. They have always been static, unchanging, impossible to fully decode. But now," she gestured to the tablets, "where symbols continue to flow and reshape themselves like living things." Marcus felt a strange pulling sensation, as if something was trying to draw his consciousness toward the ancient writings. Without fully realizing what he was doing, he reached out and placed his palm flat against one of the crystal tablets. The moment his skin made contact with the surface, the universe seemed to explode around him. Suddenly, he wasn't standing in the archives anymore. He was floating in space, but not the cold, empty void he knew. This was space filled with impossible structures, geometric patterns that stretched across light years, energy networks that connected stars like synapses in a vast brain. And everywhere, beings that looked exactly like humans but moved with purpose and power that spoke of mastery over fundamental forces. "The safeguards must be prepared," came a voice that seemed to speak directly into his thoughts. Marcus turned and saw a figure approaching through the cosmic vista. A woman who could have been human except for the way reality seemed to bend around her presence. "The Devourers will return as they always do. The cycle must be preserved. Who are you?" Marcus tried to speak but realized he had no physical body in this place. His thoughts themselves became his voice. "I am what you will become," the figure replied. "The pattern that your people must remember. Watch and learn, for time grows short." The space around them shifted, and Marcus found himself witnessing what could only be described as a war between gods. The Devourers appeared as writhing masses of corrupted reality, turning the very fabric of space-time into diseased extensions of their will. Against them stood beings that looked human but wielded power that made stars look like flickering candles. "We cannot destroy them completely," the woman explained as they watched cosmic-scale battles unfold around them. "They are part of the fundamental structure of existence. Entropy given intelligence, the universe's own immune system turned malignant. But we can contain them, force them into dormancy if we are willing to pay the price." Marcus watched in awe and horror as the human-like beings began to sacrifice their own advanced civilization. Ships that could reshape planets were deliberately disabled. Technologies that could manipulate time itself were carefully dismantled. Knowledge that had taken millennia to accumulate was systematically hidden away. "The safeguards we create will be triggered only by our genetic descendants," the woman continued. "But they must be descendants who have rediscovered compassion and wisdom on their own terms, not through inheritance of power. Only those who choose to help others despite having no obligation to do so can be trusted with the ultimate weapon." "What weapon?" Marcus asked, though part of him already knew the answer would be terrifying. The woman gestured, and the space around them showed a view of the galaxy from impossible distance. But instead of stars and planets, Marcus could see the quantum substrate, that underlay all reality, the mathematical foundations that determined how matter and energy behaved. The power to rewrite the basic laws of physics themselves, she said simply, to quarantine the devourers in pocket dimensions where their corruption cannot spread. But using such power requires perfect understanding and absolute moral certainty. One mistake could unravel everything that exists. Marcus felt himself being pulled back toward his physical body, the vision beginning to fade. "Wait," he called out. "How do I access this power? What do I need to do?" The woman's final words followed him back into physical reality. "Remember who you chose to be, not who you once were. The safeguards respond to wisdom, not knowledge. Lead with your heart and trust your people to follow." Marcus gasped as his consciousness snapped back into his body. He found himself lying on the floor of the archives, surrounded by concerned faces. Queen Vexara knelt beside him, her luminous eyes filled with worry and hope in equal measure. "What did you see?" she asked urgently. Marcus struggled to sit up, his mind reeling from the cosmic visions he had experienced. Around them, the Maker artifacts were glowing brighter than ever, and the crystal tablets were now displaying text that looked almost like modern English, though with concepts and mathematical principles integrated directly into the sentences. "I saw the truth," Marcus said finally, "and I understand why they left. But more importantly, I think I know how to stop the devourers. We're going to need every human ship in the fleet. And we're going to need them to do something that goes against every tactical manual ever written." He looked around, at the assembled faces, alien and human alike, and felt the weight of impossible responsibility settling on his shoulders. "We're going to need them to surrender." Admiral Rebecca Torres stared at the tactical display in disbelief, her weathered hands gripping the edge of the command table so hard her knuckles had turned white. Around the war room of the human flagship Endeavor, the assembled captains and commanders from both human and Zephyrian fleets looked equally stunned by Marcus's proposal. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. Captain Chen," Admiral Torres said slowly, her voice carrying the weight of 40 years of military experience. "You want me to order every human vessel in our fleet to power down their weapons, drop their shields, and broadcast surrender signals directly into the path of an enemy that has already consumed half the outer galaxy?" Marcus stood at the center of the room, still feeling the after-effects of his vision in the archives. The translated Maker text had revealed crucial information about the Devourer's behavior. But the strategy they outlined went against everything humans had ever learned about warfare and survival. "Not exactly surrender, Admiral," Marcus replied, calling up his own holographic display. "According to the Maker records, the Devourers don't actually attack surrendering targets immediately. They're drawn to active technology, especially weapons and defensive systems. A completely passive vessel doesn't trigger their corruption protocols." Queen Vexara, who had been granted an advisory position in the human command structure, stepped forward to support his argument. "Our own tactical analysis confirms this pattern. The Devourers always target the most technologically advanced and actively defended positions first. They seem to feed on the energy signatures of weapons fire and shield harmonics." Captain Sarah Kim, who had been promoted to lead one of the human destroyer squadrons, raised her hand. "Sir, even if they don't attack passive targets immediately, what's to stop them from just absorbing our ships once they realize we're not fighting back? We'd be handing them the entire human fleet on a silver platter." Marcus nodded grimly. "That's exactly what we're hoping they'll try to do. Because the moment they attempt to absorb human technology, the safeguards will activate." He manipulated the holographic display to show the quantum resonance patterns they had discovered in the Maker artifacts. The mathematics were complex, but the basic principle was elegant in its simplicity. Human technology, when corrupted by devourer influence, would automatically generate a specific frequency that would serve as a trigger for the ancient defenses. The Makers built their safeguards to activate only when two conditions were met, Marcus explained. First, the presence of their genetic descendants, us. Second, proof that those descendants were willing to sacrifice themselves for the greater good of galactic civilization. Complete surrender in the face of overwhelming odds qualifies as that proof. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her analysis of the Maker equations. "The quantum mathematics check out, Admiral. When devourer corruption attempts to interface with human neural patterns, it creates a resonance cascade that should activate defensive protocols embedded in the fabric of local spacetime. Admiral Torres turned to study the tactical projections showing the advancing Devourer fleet. Dozens of corrupted vessels, their hulls twisted into impossible shapes, moved through space like a plague of mechanical locusts. Behind them came the converted remains of every Zephyrian fleet that had tried to stop them. And what exactly are these defensive protocols supposed to do? The Admiral asked. The Maker records are clear about the general concept, but very vague about specific effects. Marcus felt a chill as he remembered the cosmic visions he had experienced. They rewrite local physics to create quarantine zones, pocket dimensions where the Devourers can be contained until they eventually consume themselves. But Admiral, there's something else. The process requires a conscious decision from every human involved. We can't order people to do this, they have to choose it themselves. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just a military strategy. It was asking every member of the human fleet to make a leap of faith based on 10,000-year-old alien technology and the visions of one man. Commander Jake Morrison, captain of the heavy cruiser Defiance, spoke up from across the room. Captain Chen, with all due respect, you're asking us to bet the survival of our entire species on ancient alien magic and your personal mystical experience. What if you're wrong? What if the safeguards don't work or don't exist or require something we don't understand? Marcus met his gaze steadily. Then we die fighting for something greater than ourselves, Commander. The same way our species has always faced impossible odds. But if I'm right, if we can trust in the wisdom of our ancestors and the courage of our people, then we save not just humanity but every civilization in the galaxy. Queen Vexara activated her own display, showing the current strategic situation. Red zones marked Devourer-controlled territory, steadily expanding toward the core worlds where billions of innocent beings waited for salvation that might never come. The mathematics suggest that Captain Chen's plan has a reasonable chance of success, she said. But more importantly, it's the only plan we have that offers any hope at all. Traditional warfare has proven useless against the Devourers. Every weapon we fire at them eventually becomes a weapon they can use against us. Admiral Torres walked to the observation windows, staring out at the assembled fleet. Hundreds of ships hung in space, sleek Zephyrian vessels alongside the more utilitarian human craft. Every one of them represented thousands of lives, countless families and hopes and dreams. I've fought in 6 major conflicts, she said quietly, and I've learned that sometimes the most insane plan is the only one that has any chance of working. She turned back to face the room. But this decision can't come from command. Every ship, every crew member has to make this choice for themselves. Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders, even as a heavier burden settled in its place. I'll address the fleet directly, Admiral. I'll explain what we've learned and what we're asking. But the choice has to be individual and voluntary. Within an hour, every ship in the combined fleet had assembled in communications range. Marcus stood before the main display screen in the Endeavor's primary assembly hall, knowing that his words were being broadcast to over 200,000 beings from dozens of different species. People of the fleet, he began, his voice carrying clearly across the communication channels. 3 days ago, I learned something that changed everything I thought I knew about humanity's place in the universe. Today, I'm asking you to trust in that knowledge and make a choice that could save or damn every living being in this galaxy. He explained everything. The true history of human civilization, the nature of the Devourers, the safeguards built by the Makers, and the terrible price that might be required to activate them. He held nothing back, sharing even his doubts and fears about whether the ancient technology would really work. I can't order you to do this, he concluded. I can't even promise you that it will work. All I can tell you is what I believe, that humanity's greatest strength has never been our technology or our weapons. It's been our willingness to sacrifice for others, to stand up for what's right even when we have nothing to gain and everything to lose. The responses came in slowly at first, then in a flood. Ship after ship signaled their agreement to the plan. Human crews voted almost unanimously to participate. Even more surprisingly, the Zephyrian vessels, whose crews had witnessed firsthand what the Devourers could do, chose to stand with their human allies. Captain Kim's voice came over the communications channel, speaking for her destroyer squadron. Sir, my people have made their choice. When the Devourers arrive, we'll power down completely and trust in the wisdom of the Makers. If we're wrong, at least we'll face the end together. Similar messages poured in from across the fleet. Not every ship agreed. Some crews chose to break formation and head for distant safe zones, and Marcus couldn't blame them for making that choice. But over 90% of the combined fleet remained, ready to bet everything on an ancient promise and the courage of the human spirit. As the last confirmations came in, Marcus realized that they had done something unprecedented in galactic history, united dozens of species in a single act of faith. Whatever happened next, they would face it as one people, standing together against the darkness that threatened to consume everything they held dear. The Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace like a nightmare given physical form. Through the observation windows of the Endeavor, Marcus watched as dozens of corrupted vessels materialized in the system, their hulls twisted into impossible geometries that hurt to look at directly. What had once been sleek Zephyrian warships now resembled organic growths more than spacecraft, their surfaces pulsing with veins of sickly yellow energy. Fleet-wide communication, all frequencies, Admiral Torres ordered, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. All vessels initiate shutdown protocol. Power down weapons, shields, and propulsion systems, broadcasting surrender signals on all channels. Marcus felt his stomach clench as he watched the tactical displays go dark one by one. Over 200 ships representing the combined might of human and Zephyrian civilizations voluntarily made themselves defenseless in the face of an enemy that had already consumed half the galaxy. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of life support systems and the sound of his own heartbeat. "Sir," Lieutenant Kim reported from her station, "sensors are detecting massive energy buildups from the Devourer vessels. They're scanning our formation, but they're not firing." On the main display, the corrupted ships moved through space with predatory grace, circling the surrendered fleet like sharks studying potential prey. Their sensor beams played over the human vessels, but the expected weapons fire never came. "The Maker records were correct," Queen Vexara said softly from her position beside Marcus. "They don't immediately attack surrendering targets. But now comes the real test." Marcus activated his personal communicator to address the fleet. "All ships maintain passive posture. Do not respond to provocation. Remember, we need them to try to absorb our vessels for the safeguards to activate." What followed was perhaps the most terrifying hour in human history. The Devourer ships approached the surrendered fleet slowly, methodically, their twisted hulls extending cable-like appendages toward the nearest vessels. Marcus watched in horror as these organic-looking connectors made contact with human ships, beginning the corruption process that had destroyed every other civilization that had faced this enemy. "Captain," Dr. Vasquez called out urgently, "I'm reading massive quantum fluctuations from the Maker artifacts in our hold. Whatever's supposed to happen, I think it's starting." The first sign that something was different came from Captain Morrison's heavy cruiser Defiance. As the Devourer corruption began to spread through its systems, the ship's hull started to glow with soft blue light, the same color as the Maker artifacts. But instead of the twisted organic changes that had affected every other corrupted vessel, the Defiance began to shimmer and phase, as if it was becoming translucent. "Morrison, report," Admiral Torres demanded. "What's your status?" The captain's voice came back over the communications channel, filled with wonder and confusion. "Admiral, this is going to sound impossible, but my ship is singing." The corruption started to take hold and then something else kicked in. "My crew reports feeling a presence in their minds, not invasive like the Devourers, but protective, comforting." Marcus felt a surge of hope mixed with terror as he watched more ships begin to exhibit the same phenomenon. Each vessel touched by Devourer corruption started to glow with Maker light, and instead of being absorbed into the enemy collective, they began to exist in some kind of intermediate state, neither fully corrupted nor entirely normal. "The safeguards are activating," he announced to the fleet. "The Makers built their defenses to trigger when Devourer corruption encountered human consciousness. Our people are serving as living keys to unlock 10,000 years of dormant technology. But the Devourers were not passive observers of this unexpected development. As more human ships began to glow with ancient light, the corrupted vessels surrounding them started to pulse with increased energy. Their attack shifted from absorption attempts to direct assault, launching waves of twisted energy at the surrendered fleet. "Sir, they're firing on us," Captain Kim reported as her destroyer was struck by a beam of yellow corruption. "Shields are down, weapons are offline." "We're completely defenseless," Marcus watched in amazement as the energy beams passed harmlessly through the glowing human ships. The Maker Light seemed to create some kind of protective field that rendered Devourer weapons completely ineffective. But more than that, each attack that struck a human vessel caused the light to grow brighter, spreading to nearby ships like a contagious beacon of hope. "Fleet-wide announcement," Marcus commanded. "All vessels maintain surrender posture. The safeguards are working, but we need to let the process complete. Trust in the plan." Queen Vexara stepped up to the observation windows, her expression filled with awe as she watched the ancient defenses finally awakening after 10 millennia of dormancy. "Captain, look at the space around our ships. The Maker Light isn't just protecting us, it's changing the fundamental properties of local space-time." Marcus followed her gaze and saw what she meant. The area around each glowing human vessel was beginning to warp and twist, but not in the chaotic, organic way of Devourer corruption. This was geometric, mathematical, as if reality itself was being rewritten according to some higher order of physics. "Dr. Vasquez," he called out, "what are your readings showing?" The xenoarchaeologist looked up from her instruments with an expression of scientific wonder, mixed with terror. "Captain, the quantum substrate is reorganizing itself around our position. It's like the universe is remembering something it forgot. The mathematical constants that define how matter and energy behave are shifting toward different values." As if responding to her words, the Devourer fleet suddenly found itself in serious trouble. Their corrupted vessels, which had been perfectly adapted to the normal laws of physics, began to malfunction as those laws changed around them. Ships that had moved with fluid grace started to stumble and falter as their impossible geometries became incompatible with the new reality being written by Maker technology. The quarantine zone is forming, Marcus realized. The safeguards aren't just protecting us, they're creating a pocket of altered space-time where the Devourers can't exist in their current form. But the enemy wasn't giving up without a fight. The corrupted vessels began to pulse in unison, channeling their collective energy in a desperate attempt to break through the Maker defenses. The space around the human fleet became a battleground between two fundamental forces: entropy and order, corruption and preservation, chaos and the carefully crafted mathematics of reality itself. "Sir," Admiral Torres called out urgently, "sensors are detecting massive power buildups from the Devourer command vessel. They're preparing some kind of ultimate attack. If that thing gets through the safeguards..." Marcus felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settle on his shoulders as he realized that the battle was far from over. The Maker's safeguards were working, but the Devourers had 10,000 years to evolve and adapt since their last defeat. The outcome would depend not just on ancient technology, but on the courage and determination of every human being in the fleet to hold their positions and trust in a plan that defied everything they understood about warfare and survival. "All ships, hold steady," he broadcast to the fleet. "We've come this far on faith and courage. Whatever comes next, we face it together."